Hi, everybody, and welcome again to the musical Innertube. I'm John Timpane.
And I'm Don Rooney.
Got you on that one. That's John Timpane, and I'm Don Rooney. And we're here with another special guest, a man that I have known since I was in college, back in knee pants, way back in the early days of radio, back when we had steam-powered radio. Tad Stones, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, everyone. And yes, we all made fun of Don for wearing knee pants.
I didn't have to, but I did. Hey, before we go any farther, Tad, we had a guest on a couple of shows ago, Matt Kaplan from the Planetary Society, and we were asking him, about stargazing. And he says one of the great things you could do was go out and watch the International Space Station go overhead. And as I understand that, you did that just the other night, right?
Just last night. It was fantastic. And I tried it before. And of course, I walked out. It was a cloudy night. And it was like, okay, I had a little app that told me where to point and everything. Well, last night, clear night, but I thought it would be like watching a moving star. So I'm looking at the right angle. And Lisa, my wife, she walked out too. And then she said, well, is that it over there? It was slightly over, but it was so bright. Had I just seen it myself, I would have glanced at it and said, oh, that's an airplane. But it was incredibly bright, large, and moving like a son of a gun. But it was somehow very calming. It was like being in connection with these people who were literally above it all. So, that was a fantastic thing. I highly recommend it. There's several apps out there about following the ISS that people can try out.
I'm going to tell a brief story about how Tad and I met, and that will lead into how Tad got into animation. When we were both working at the college radio station in Loyola in Los Angeles, KXLU, Tad came up to me one day and said, starting tomorrow, you're going to do the morning show, which is what Tad had always done. Tad was Tad Stones the Stoner every morning, 6 to 10. And he says, you're going to do it. And Tad, why did you tell me I was going to have to take over your radio show?
I have no clue of this conversation. Was it because I was in love? I have no memory of this. I don't think so. That show till the last day.
Well, no, you told me that you had to concentrate on something that you were doing as a test for Disney.
Oh, that was at the very end. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So it was the end of my senior year. Yeah. I was my girlfriend at the time, who now happens to be my wife. Her suite mate was the daughter of a Disney animator and Imagineer, and said, you ought to apply for the training program, just like off the cuff. And it was like, training program? What training program? Because I wanted to be in animation, but I said the only place that makes sense is Disney because it's the only place doing full animation. I didn't have an interest, ironically, in television animation at all. And I just assumed, well, they still have the guys who started with Walt, so they don't need anybody. They're not hiring, which actually was true until like midway in my college career. And that's when they started up this very small training program. So it was just by chance that, through Lisa, I met somebody else who happened to know this little piece of information. And it worked out. I actually was just calling for information about it. And the guy assumed I was asking for an appointment. So suddenly I had an appointment to bring in my portfolio the next week. And I hadn't been an art major since my freshman year. And luckily, the head of the art department had gone on sabbatical. And the person who took their place was my ceramics teacher, who I was an assistant to. And he said, sure, you can sit in on this class and that class. So in a week, I put together all the life drawings I could and quick sketches. And very long story shorter, I started at Disney 3 days after graduation with the idea that you have about 8 weeks, 16 weeks, I forget, to do 2 personal tests if you survive the first one to actually have a job. Up till that, it was just you're basically learning and taking a test at the same time. And that's how I ended up at Disney. It was because Don Rooney was nice enough to take over my morning radio show.
Exactly. Because if I hadn't done that, you would have been completely tied up with radio and your life would have gone in a completely different direction.
Exactly. If he had just held out for more money, I wouldn't be here today.
Say, Tad, I have a question because I'm totally ignorant about these things, but the portfolio you showed them was all still art, right? You didn't have animated clips or anything that you could show them at that point, right? We're talking
Yeah, I mean, everybody's
mid-70s, right? So it's,
There were, yeah, it was a big deal to do an animated test, and a guy who came in about a year or less after me, Randy Cartwright, went on, among other things, to be head of story on Shrek, and at Disney animated the carpet in Aladdin, for instance. Is currently working at Disney TV animation, boarding on many shows. He had an actual full color film that he had done himself that had won some student awards, but that was the rare thing. So really what we just showed, they wanted to see life drawings and action poses, really quick sketches. And I was the first one to say, I got to do this fast. I was never a sports guy, but I like what's on TV, basketball games. I'm going to do basketball players. And I cheated because my friends had Sports Illustrated and I would take some poses out of those magazines. But the studio, they had wanted more sketches. So I had done more quick sketches like that after my first meeting with them. And one of the things that impressed them is that, one, I came back immediately with stuff, because in animation, it helps if you do a lot of drawings in a short amount of time.
right.
And they had never told anybody to, try sketching off the TV. Now, this is before VHS players, so you didn't have a tape that you could rewind or freeze frame or anything like that. You just had to analyze the action on the go. So that worked out. So they didn't need a polished portfolio. These days, because there have been so many animation schools, going back at least 2 decades, 2.5 maybe, when I started seeing what the art schools were turning out in terms of animation students, I've always said, like, if I was applying today, I wouldn't make it. Wow. There's no way I was as good as these guys.
Does Disney still use, do they still use live animation? Do they still use frame by frame? Is that still part of what they do?
It's not, they have like special units who will do it. Like on Moana, that was a CG film, but the tattoo on Maui that comes to life and animates was actually done in 2D and then mapped onto the character via computers.
Wow, no kidding. That is so cool.
Yeah, because some things just work better. In fact, the guy, Eric Goldberg, the guy who animated that character, is the guy who was the lead animator on Genie in Aladdin.
Wow, that is so cool.
And Very Eric good. Goldberg seems to pop up in a lot of his own cartoons.
So I hear, yes.
He's a very, very recognizable guy. He's a little round guy with a mustache and blonde hair, and I've seen him in a lot of the cartoons he works on.
And then I came in about 6 months, I think, 5 to 6 months after Ron Clements did, and Ron Clements was the writer and director of Little Mermaid and Aladdin and Moana and Hercules and Treasure Planet and all those in between. So it was like, that's kind of the era that I showed up in. But Ron and his partner, John Musker, have a cameo in every one of their movies. There's always a bearded, redheaded guy and a tall, skinny guy standing next to him.
Now, you didn't go into the movies. You went into the television side. How did that happen?
Well, I started at features. I was on features, sadly, before everybody got credits. The features used to only have 6 cards of credits. I started on the original Rescuers, was in Story on Fox and Hound. I did some educational films, produced one on health and alcohol abuse that was an animated film done overseas, actually, in New Zealand. And because I worked on that educational film, they reassigned me over to WED, which is now known as Imagineering, to work on the Epcot Center. And because it was combining education and entertainment, I worked with one of the Disney great animators, Ward Kimball. He and I shared
Oh
a
my
room
God,
for about
yes.
9 months, about, I don't know, an 8x10 room or something. That was like working with a time machine. That was the one point in my life that I wish I had kept a diary. But, I was a fairly new father. My son was like 2 or 3 years old, and it wasn't like, tut-tut, son, I have to write down my life experience instead of playing with you. And then after that, I was supposed to make some documentaries based on the Epcot pavilions and the networks, because the studio was thinking that, they're going to treat us just like they treated Walt, when they begged him to do something for TV. And the network said, no, we have our own news departments to do low-rated documentaries. We really don't need yours. Because it was supposed to coincide with the opening of Epcot, which would have been right in the middle of their debut of new shows. So They really didn't want to take off their new shows to put on a documentary about the land. Anyway, from there it was about a year and a half where they really should have fired me because I wasn't sure what I was doing, and I was just in nooks and crannies helping out where I could. And then I ended up doing a special with the people over in licensings. They wanted to do television specials, and I did one with Goofy. I boarded one called Mickey and the Space Pirates, which didn't go. But those were the same people who met with Michael Eisner when he first came. And so Michael started in television animation at ABC, and it was so important to him that the Sunday of his first week at Disney, he had a meeting at his house. I got a phone call, Dad, we know you're on vacation and it's the weekend, but would you mind coming to Michael Eisner's house? And this is like the new guy who took over Disney, like I'm going to say no. Anyway, There was about 10 people there. I pitched Mickey and the Space Pirates. Michael said, that's fantastic, but Mickey's too precious. Like from the get-go, he knew he wanted to take care of him and saying, we have to make sure we can do this at a good quality. And his feeling was they don't expect television animation to be of the same quality as feature animation, but it should be the best stuff on TV. So that was our goal. And I was at that meeting, wished them all well, went back to features, was actually thinking of leaving the company. And then I thought, well, maybe if I could freelance storyboard. And one of the guys from TV animation, one of the executives, happened to be visiting the lot. I saw him, I said hi and chatted and said, hey, do you use freelance storyboard artists? And, my thought was if I could freelance storyboards and make whatever my salary was, then in my, quote, spare time, I could write science fiction short stories to feed my soul or something. And he said, oh, you don't want to do that. Why don't you come visit us? And I showed up at the new building where TV animation was just like one wing long. And he started introducing me around like, oh, Tad will be coming over here. And it's like news to me, but I didn't say anything.
Right.
And I ended up in TV for a very short time. I was technically in management, but I was coming up with show ideas where they really wanted me to work with outside people. I didn't know any outside people. I had only worked at Disney. So when we had a gong show where you go through ideas and it's just the initial idea, it either goes or not, I think we pitched 22 shows and 18 of them were mine. And those were literally one-liners. And it's like, Trojan birds and Legionnaire cats. It was like the city of Troy up in a tree, and it was rode on a coyote. That's as deep as I got in those things. Anyway, soon NBC had been working on the Gummy Bears with one story editor. They wanted to make a change. Suddenly I was the guy, and by the end of the third season of Gummies, I was story editor and co-producer, and that officially began my creative career at TV animation. And it really suited me in that in my career at Disney up till then, which was, about almost 10 years by that time, I had always changed my job every year and a half. And now I had the same job, but my shows changed about every year and a half or so. So I rather, do multiple stories instead of spending, 4 years on one single story.
Excellent.
Until my friends turned out features, and then it was like, why didn't I stay at features? But there's a lot of people who started at features with me who weren't there anymore, so who knows if I would have survived.
It seems like such a huge, confusing operation just to hear your storyline of your career. Was it that confusing to be there? I mean, did you ever feel that there's just too many parts, you could never encompass the whole thing in your head?
What people really have a hard time realizing is when I went to Disney originally, there were only 65 people, actually it was 55 people in the feature department, not counting the ink and paint women who still painted cells that were photographed under the camera. We all had moviolas in our offices, but that's it. 55 people turned out, feature films like Robin Hood, and Jungle Book, and Aristocats, that era in there. So it was a tiny, here's what we did. At lunchtime, some of us would go up into the catwalks of the sound stages and throw Super Balls off the catwalks just to see them bounce, because the sound stages were being used to store 16 millimeter educational films. And it was like the company didn't even think in terms of, hey, we can make some coin by, renting out these sound stages when we're not using them. They did about 3 films a year and an animated film every 4 or 5 years. So it was a tiny, tiny little place. And then, of course, they had Disneyland and then soon Disney World. And that made them, what we think of as Little Disney. And it wasn't until, the change of management that it was like, we have these incredible assets and nobody's using them. And a lot of what they did that started growing the company at breakneck speed was just doing normal stuff, that other companies were doing it. It's like, why aren't you doing this? Like, hey, we have a motion picture studio here. Maybe we should make more movies. And, they went from 3 movies a year to, 9 or 10 movies a year at very least.
Well, and, they had such a great run and are still having one. Frozen seems to come up in a conversation every single day, whether I'm involved in it or not. I mean, they just have had this incredible run of excellent, creative people with a good eye for stories, and I'm not saying everything has been a hit, but I mean, it seems like almost every one of their animated features has an audience, has a certain number of people who just love it. That's, to me, that was what was amazing. I mean, obviously everyone knew it was expanding and becoming this entertainment empire pretty fast too. But
yeah, I know. I mean, that was before they bought half the entertainment franchises in the world.
Right.
But I mean, Disney at its best does family entertainment, and in that kids can watch it, but adults can watch it. Adults without kids can watch it, and I think that applies to Star Wars, Marvel films, as well as the animated films. But that was the whole thing, is to not think down. And a lot of it was Jeffrey Katzenberg coming in along with, who went on to found DreamWorks. But Jeffrey treated animated films as real movies. Not when there was a film, Black Cauldron, not a shining achievement, perhaps, of Disney animation.
Yeah, not one of the better ones.
Yeah. Anyway, at one point, Jeff was in a sweatbox, which is the projection room where we would look at film clips. And Jeffrey said, there was a Horn King coming down the stairs. And he says, do you have this from another angle? And there's kind of a silence. And the producer kind of said, we could draw it from another angle. And, Jeffrey kind of slapped his forehead and laughed. And it was very interesting to me in that some of the old guard who, and these were not the guys who started with Walt. These were like this, they had left, and it was like this second tier down, who suddenly were in charge of things. They kind of laughed as if derisively, as if, not in front of him, obviously, as if this guy doesn't know anything, look how he's with another angle. And the younger guy said, he's thinking about it like a movie. He's asking for another angle because it needs a better angle there. And in fact, one of the things that Jeffrey did was he brought on film editors, not just to be cutters, but to come in at the storyboard stage as they're developing story reels or animatics to say, well, you could get the story point across better if you had this or this or that.
Right.
I'm cutting this together. Yeah. I could really use a cutaway at this point to give us some scope to where we are. And the guys would be drawing it. So you have that cinematic input early on. And of course, as that happened, the entire staff was starting to study, more modern filmmaking techniques.
You're making such a good point, because in the history of cartoons, it's very often been a two-dimensional world where there's, in essence, one camera, right? It might be running along the ground with Mickey or something. But it's only in like the feature movies that you get the sense of there possibly being more than one. Like Snow White has real cinematic value like that. It's actually, there aren't any cameras, but there are different angles. There are edits that mean something, right? And in Fantasia, you get that too. So that's a really good point. That in a lot of movies, a lot of animated features, there's just one camera. And that's what you get to look, so to speak. I'm speaking metaphorically.
Well, part of it is the style of the director, Woolley Reitherman, who did Jungle Book, was the lead director on it anyway.
Yes.
He tended to want to showcase the animators and showcase the animation. So he didn't have shots very often anyway that would truck through a forest or somebody is going in and out of bushes. There generally was where the animation was framed by trees or books or, castle columns. And it was up to the animators to make it happen, as opposed to, let's do an upshot or a down shot or something that shows them very tiny in the distance. He didn't think that way. He was a fantastic animator himself.
Sure.
But he was more about keeping what's on the screen at any one time entertaining. Sometimes in his later films, you'd maybe having trouble of, what was that movie about? But while you were there, the audience was entertained. But there was a different mindset. I remember when Don Bluth was still there, he kind of got people together to watch some animation. So I got a lot of the young animators together, and he talked about, you guys should go to ballet and study movements and mimes and go to the theater to see the broad acting and all that. And we walked out of that. I was with Ron Clemens, who, again, fantastic director, but who I shared an office with for some time. Ron said he never talks about movies. He talks about theater and mime and ballet, but those are things that would be useful to look at. But we are making movies. We're making pieces of film that go into a projector that, show up on a screen.
Right.
So I thought right there is an example of a different mindset. And that's before Jeffrey was anywhere near the place. That was Ron's head. And you see a lot of that in The Little Mermaid. And Ron didn't get directing credit on Mermaid. It was John Musker and I forget who the other director was. But from then on, Ron and John were a team for both writing and directing.
And Don Bluth went on later on to make his own animation. He did, what was it, the American Tail with the Five-Older Mouse? Was that Don Bluth or was that somebody else?
He did American Tail, which was a big success. He also did Secrets of Nim, which was artistically one of his best ones. And then, in my opinion, I don't think he ever came up with a strong enough story. He always had the talent and the animators, but that those stories that really made you feel and stuff, have sympathetic characters that you identified with. I think he just missed the mark on his later stuff.
Yeah. So you're at Disney, and there's a whole group of animators that come in at the same time you are. As you said, Ron Clements and some of the others went to feature animation and started off doing things like The Little Mermaid and other things that would break ground. And you went to television and started breaking ground in that with things like DuckTales. Were you involved in DuckTales at all?
I was in some of the development meetings, but it was already ongoing. There was a writing partners, Ken Kuntz and David Wiemers, and when they talked about a bigger show, possibly for syndication, they said, Carl Barks has this huge library of fantastic stories, with Uncle Scrooge and Donald and the nephews and all that. And that,
yeah, Carl Barks had written and drawn the comic book version of Uncle Scrooge.
No, he created Uncle Scrooge. There was no Uncle Scrooge before Carl Barks. He did like the Donald Duck comics, and the difference of Donald in the comics versus Donald's in the cartoons. In the cartoons, Donald couldn't really talk. You couldn't understand him except for a very, very limited vocabulary. Exactly. And in fact, some of the laughs came from him saying something like, well, isn't that peculiar? And the idea that he could say that in that voice would generally get a laugh with audiences. Whereas in the comics, his character really grew because he was like a super salesman. He was the duck with all the bad luck. But he would talk for, paragraphs. So it was a different kind of storytelling. But Carl Barks built an entire universe of characters and worlds and adventures, and that was the ripe stuff for DuckTales. So I helped out on that. In the first season, I was one of the people giving notes on it. When they went into the second season, Jeffrey, and again, we were all learning the business at the same time. And Jeffrey was kind of treating it, and Michael, as what you would do with a live action series is what can we bring to the second season to advertise it in a different way? And they wanted new characters. So I pitched Space Duck, which did not go, Bubba Duck, which was just this caveman kid. And then the last character I pitched was RoboDuck, because RoboCop had come out the year before. And that I even had a name. I said, this is Fenton Crackshell, and this is, what he does. He's this armored kind of superhero. And they loved it. And then they redesigned him, of course, and they even put an R on his chest. And then I wasn't on DuckTales at this point. It's probably on Gummies, actually. I don't know whether it was legal or who. They said, we shouldn't use RoboDuck. Let's use, and someone came up with Gizmo Duck. But nobody ever told the artist, which, so it's kind of like that R stayed on his chest. But anyway, again, I pitched those characters. They accepted them, loved them. But I didn't really create the character. I created the concept and pitched it. But the guys on the show, again, in that case, Ken Kuntz, David Wiemers, really embraced the character, gave him a backstory, gave him a mother that he lived with, and really created the character. Actually, it was that same meeting where we pitched Kit Colby and the Rescue Rangers, and they said they liked the show, but we didn't like the main character, and they didn't like this Kit Colby guy. They didn't feel anything for him, and you try to gently argue away. Oh, we can fix it. We can go on, and they say no. And Jeffrey said, guys, we like the show. It's just not a home run yet. And then the meeting went on, and we went down, boy, DuckTales is such a big success. Let's, what are the other characters we go through? The Disney classics. It's like, we're not doing Mickey. Donald's hard to animate, and he's kind of in DuckTales. Goofy, yes, develop Goofy for something, because he's always been an everyman character, and there's plenty of things he could do. Pluto, we're not going to do a dog. Chip and Dale, and it was Michael Eisner who said, put those chipmunks in that show. And Jeffrey said, home run. And that started Chippendale's Rescue Rangers.
You were the producer of that, correct?
Yeah, I was producer, lead, story editor. In live action terms, I would be considered the showrunner. I produced it with Alan Zaslov, who I did many of my shows with, who recently passed away. Alan went back to being I think he was an errand boy at Termite Terrace back in the Warner Brothers Shorts days, and then went on to work on Gerald McBoing Boing and other characters from the UPA studios, doing all sorts of groundbreaking animation stuff.
Hey, Tad, can you, for our audience that may not know much about how this works, can you say what the producer of an animated show actually does? I realize that the joke on Broadway is that a producer does all the stuff that no one else can or wants to do. I imagine there's an element of that to it. But can you tell me, in your daily work, what were some of the duties that you had as the producer of a show?
You know what? It's frankly different at every studio, or back then at least it was. Producer basically meant you had responsibility for the show. You would have a line producer who were the people who actually, herded the cats and put out schedules and that sort of thing. Right. And my input at that time would be storyboard needs more time. Can we afford that? You're working at budgets. And then after that, really, I was totally in a creative role. The producer side came in with me saying, yeah, this isn't quite working. It's got to go out the door. We literally shipped shows, as in putting all of our artwork into boxes, tape them up, and ship them away overseas to be done. All the decisions would ultimately go through me. Character designs, prop designs. I would look at storyboards, give notes to the directors. So you're basically directing directors and story editing to story editors who are then working with writers. And our schedules were just much shorter then than they are now.
Now, how does this get you to your crowning creation, which we haven't even mentioned yet, and that is Darkwing Duck? How did that come about?
That was, again, Jeffrey Katzenberg. They loved trick names or enticing names for shows, or just onomatopoeia or whatever, like Rescue Rangers, if you trace its heritage back to its first pitch, was pitched as Miami Mice, and they laughed at it. They just liked the name, and that even got to a pilot script. But we changed the name to Metro Mice, again, for legal stuff, I guess. But it was just mice in a police station. And it's like there's certain crimes you can't do. You can't be murdering characters every week or every day. Anyway, Metro Mice became, ultimately Kid Colby and the Rescue Rangers became Chippendale's Rescue Rangers. They just their feeling was, you have to put out a quality show. We expect that out of you. But if you have some sort of catchy name, maybe more people will tune in those first few shows, and then it's up to you to hold them. So DuckTales had done an episode called Double O Duck, which was a James Bond parody with Launchpad McQuack. And Jeffrey loved the name, and he said, I want you to create a show named Double O Duck, but the lead character can't be Launchpad McQuack. It has to be a new character. That's the point of this. I was not excited about it because it just sounded like a James Bond parody. Anyway, I pitched it as such, and I just felt it didn't have any Disney heart. It didn't have anything to care about. It was just a parody. And Jeffrey looked at it, and he said, this is just a parody. There's no one to care about. It doesn't have any Disney heart. So I was then forced to do what I should have done, which is don't pitch something you're not excited about.
Yes.
I don't know who. I mean, he was wearing a mask and a cape even then in the early stage, but it was a white tuxedo. And when we were brainstorming with other creative guys who eventually would work on the show, Dwayne Capizzi is a story editor who had done many animated shows like Men in Black and Alf. Anyway, he said, boy, I look at the mask and the tuxedo and he feels more like a pulp hero than a spy. And that just, lit up my brain because I love the old pulp stuff. I was too young to have actually listened to them on the radio, but I had heard tapes. I knew stories about them, Green Hornet, The Shadow. Launchpad was always in there for, just as a good luck charm or something, till finally the show didn't click until we added an adopted daughter, Goslin. And
Goslin, right.
Yeah, because that was the heart of the show, because ultimately, looking back on it, we said it's basically, what if Batman had a little girl who refused to stay at home? And that was her. And that's what sold the show. And unlike my friends, Ron and John over at Features, who can sit in an audience and hear people laughing or crying or whatever at their movies, it wasn't until I retired that I was invited as a guest to comic conventions. And I had people come up to me. At my first one, there were 3 separate women who basically said, this was an anchor of my childhood, the relationship of the father and the daughter. My dad left. The other woman said it was a real rocky time. My dad was a drinker or whatever. And it was kind of like, sorry you had a crappy childhood. I'm glad we could help. But it really, that was intentional, not the effect. But I said, they're going to hug. She's going to be just as crazy as he is. She's going to be a pain in the butt. But we never question that they don't love each other. And that was rare in TV shows at the time, especially one that was as broad and, kind of Warner Brothers slapstick as Darkwing Duck. That was the first show where the character, turned to camera and addressed the audience, which had never been done at Disney.
That happened a lot, and that was an interesting feature. And one had seen it before and elsewhere, but when you say it's the first Disney show that did that, it's a storytelling technique that, in a way, it's one other thing that makes it more like a movie or more like a TV show, because that's sort of where that's from, right? In most cartoons, the characters aren't stopping long enough to say anything to you.
No, but you think back on it, again, I grew up, because Disney was so tight-fisted with its cartoons when it came to television, most of my generation grew up with the original Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies and all the early Warner Brothers stuff.
We're the same
and
generation.
Daffy and Bugs were always talking to the audience, and then they do gags where, somebody enters the theater in the front row and they're a silhouette at the bottom of the screen, and Bugs would be pissed off that they're interrupting things.
Madam, would you please remove your chapeau?
Yes. And so all that stuff was part of our comedic makeup. So when it came time to doing a show, which tonally I pitched that way, I said, what if we take those old shorts, make them 22 minutes long, and give them Disney heart? That's the kind of show I want to do. We largely succeeded, but heart was an important part. But I did have an executive say, but Tad, if this guy can have a safe dropped on him and survive, how do we have any sense of jeopardy, like when you cut to a commercial? And I said, because we'll play scary music and he'll look scared. And that's exactly what we did. Worked perfect. You're just in the moment, and that's like saying in any, show to say that, well, Captain Kirk is the star. He's not in any trouble,
right,
but don't wear a red shirt,
Now, you had talked earlier about all of the responsibility landing on the producer's shoulders. How much of that did you do? Like, for example, when you go to cast Darkwing Duck, the voice talent, did you have any hand in that at all?
Oh, yeah. All of that. I talked to the casting person and Ginny McSwain, who Jim Cummings, who is the American voice of Darkwing Duck, calls me Darkwing's dad, and Darkwing's mom is Ginny McSwain, because it was Jim's performance that the writers heard and then kind of, ooh, we like how he did that. Let's feed it back to him. Because Jim would, ad-lib stuff. Ginny helped build that character with Jim when he did something unique she would remind him of it the next recording session when it came to a similar situation. So things where Darkwing goes, yep, 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 with something, no, don't say yes, go, or he did this kind of flattened, hurt voice. And I remember her reminding him, and it was this feedback loop that really helped build the character and really nailed the kind of feeling for the voice. And Chrissy Cavanaugh, who did the voice of Gosalyn, that was her voice. That she also did Chucky and Rugrats. Same voice, just a little different performance. But she was totally unique because she would approach a line in a way you had never expected.
Okay, so what I'm interested in now is you're retired. Now the world knows that you're Darkwing Duck's dad. Now you're going around the country and the world to some of these comic conventions, presenting Darkwing again and getting that feedback that you never got when the thing was on the air.
The fantastic thing was in Russia. They told me, they're going to be big lines and things like that. I said, yeah. And they kept on trying to organize me before. And I said, are you sure? This is how I usually do things. And finally, I just said, you guys are the expert. Thank God I said that because they totally relaxed. Because when I showed up, there were people standing. Well, that girl told me she stood in line 5 hours. I said, you couldn't have stood in 5 hours, line for 5 hours just to get my autograph or a sketch or buy one of my pieces of artwork. It was, I was like a rock star. I couldn't believe this. And what it was is that when the Iron Curtain fell, when the Soviet Union, disbanded, it was the early Disney afternoon shows. It was DuckTales, Darkwing, Chip and Dale. Those were the first cartoons that showed up in Russia. So previous to that, they didn't have Russian cartoons, at least not series like that. Yeah. They had like a Russian fairy tale. The animation was the stories were good. The animation was very basic. And suddenly this came on full of color, showing a world that they didn't know existed. I'm not talking about, the supernatural or fantasy aspects of our shows. It was like, no, people have streets and cars and skyscrapers. And, there was just a different kind of a world. And every single child of that generation watched those shows. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is not Disney, but I guess it came on quickly after that. And they would buy bootleg tapes at kiosks. It wasn't like criminal. It was just like everybody did it. You bought those tapes, and so the kids could watch it over and over and over again because it was called the Disney Club. It was on each weekend. So everybody knew of them. And to illustrate this further, 2 cops came up, and the guys got very nervous. And they said, when is this going to be over? And he said, 6 o'clock, it will be cleaned out, everything, on the convention, just kind of a little nervous. And they said, no. We just want an autograph. And they said they were going to let him cut in line. He says, no, people don't like the police enough. We don't want to do that.
That is fabulous.
It just, again, it was the generation. So no matter who it was, they knew those shows. So that was, everybody wanted a hug. I mean, some people talked if I was doing a sketch or something, but they would tell me stories. Some people were shaking in my, you go to shake hands and they're vibrating. It was just incredible because of just what that meant to their childhood. So I was flabbergasted at that. That was fantastic. That interaction was fantastic. In the United States, I get more time to just speak one-on-one, and my artwork actually lasts for people to buy because, I'll prepare art ahead of time just so I have something to sell, and they'll buy pieces of original artwork. And then usually in the fall of every year, I do like a charity auction that helps the homeless shelters here in San Fernando Valley. And that's great too. And I can't believe what people pay when it's a blind auction thing. So they don't know what the other person is bidding on it. They only know the minimum bid, and the more nervous they get, the higher the bid is, and it's like, this is wrong, but it's going to charity. So this is great, but I am not worth that much.
Well, do you ever get blowback from Disney? You are obviously sketching the Rescue Rangers and Darkwing Duck for these comic book conventions. Do you ever get blowback from Disney saying, "Hey, no, we own those characters. You can't be making money off them"?
I don't do prints. Which definitely, if you're going to do prints, you should have a license with the company. They could close me down if they wanted to. Disney knows it's going on. If you ask them permission, they have to say no to protect their legal rights, as every media company does. But it's like, no, this is fandom. They know that ultimately this fans the enthusiasm for their films and their products and all of that. So they could make an issue with it, but they don't. If animation writing was covered by the WGA, there would be absolutely no denying that I am the creator of Darkwing Duck, and because how contracts work and what work I did and wrote and all of that. But in animation, and I proudly take on the moniker of creator of Darkwing Duck and Darkwing's dad, but that overall impact that people got when they saw the show is, it literally takes a village. You'll have like a crew of 80 people and key players. There's a Disney artist who I first knew from features, Mike Peraza, did a lot of early work with me on Darkwing Duck. Bob Klein was another artist. But the writers, they create the individual scripts. All the storylines went through me. And especially with Darkwing, a lot of initial concepts came from me. A lot of the villains came from me. But the way they were fleshed out, I should say, was a matter of the writers and the actors and, and the storyboard artists putting it all together. So it was just fantastic. It was a huge team. And that is what I miss from working in animation the most, is the crew and the people who are working together, even at breakneck pace.
I will say, too, having a 10-year-old granddaughter, I am now into Star and Steven Universe and Gravity Falls. We've seen all that, and Gravity Falls and Star are Disney products. Very involved, very adult-like, I think, in the tone of the show and in the mysteries they weave in and out. So yeah, I think that animation it hasn't missed a step. It hasn't dropped at all from what I'm seeing right now.
There is a scene in Gravity Falls where Dipper is swearing he's going to get basically a picture of the Loch Ness Monster, and everybody always has a crummy, fuzzy picture, but he's brought 13 cameras. There's no way he's not going to have a camera, and within like 4 seconds, he loses every camera but one. And I was just out loud laughing at that, and I smile every time I talk about it. So, modern cartoons can do amazing things. People get caught up. They say, "Oh, that's such." I remember DuckTales has a different design style. It's than the old shows. The old shows were classical or more rounded, and they've done a edgier drawing style. And people say, "Oh, the animation isn't any good." And I said, we wish we could have had animation this good. I've had occasion to visit the DuckTales crew, the new one, and that entire crew is made up of people who are fans of the original shows. And to see how they were inspired by what we did, and yet now they're doing a modern show, and this show has continuity and interwoven storylines, and they set up things in the first episode that are just paying off now or about to pay off in the third season of the show. Those guys are just crazy good and fantastic, and they have a different kind of a schedule, which they still feel is too tight for what they try and what they're able to accomplish and what they would like to accomplish. But it is they have time to think through every thought. And I am not a person who says, oh, it was better back in the old days. There's always been good and bad cartoons, and I'm seeing such of the most innovative, wonderful cartoons out right now. There's just a charming show I always come back to on Netflix called Hilda, which is a fantasy of a little girl in this amazing world. And I rarely do this. I've gone back and watched through the whole series, a couple of times. And it's just like, oh, how did they do that kind of stuff? That's just so fantastic. So I really love the stuff modern animators are able to do. And Netflix is bankrolling a lot of new shows because in a pandemic, animation industry has not stopped. They are working from home, but they don't have to go on sets. They don't have to be next to other people. So they've continued to storyboard, they've recorded, they've color keyed because they don't have to work with actual paints. They're doing it digitally. And that industry is moving on without a stop.
Thanks, Tad, for being with us today. It was great talking to you. And if people want to get in touch with you, do you have some sort of way that they can do that?
Generally, I'm on social media under my name. It keeps me honest that way. So if you look at Tad Stones on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, these days I'm trying to teach myself to paint. So you might end up seeing more gouache paintings than ducks, but I still post that stuff. Ducks and chipmunks are always in my feed one way or another. So just kind of search for my name. You'll find me.
This has been fantastic. I want to thank Tad. It's been just a wonderful, look at how these really wonderful shows were created and how really this legacy got rolling.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Don. Had a great time.
And thank you for listening. If you'd like to get in touch with us, send us an email. musicalinnertube@gmail.com. Musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com. We're on Facebook and we're on Twitter. John is at @JTimPayne and I'm at @DonRooney9. Our webpage is Musical Innertube. That's musical spelled with 2 A's, MUSICAAL, Innertube, all one word, .libsyn, spelled LIBSYN.com. Now, the webpage will take you to all the other fine places that play the Innertube, Stitcher, SoundCloud. You can give us a review on iTunes. And if you want to check out old episodes of the Innertube, go to the Musical Innertube on YouTube. And thanks again to the virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing our theme music.